Welcome, everybody, to another Optimal Bio podcast. Tonight, we are honored to have Dr. Shawn Baker with us. He's the author of The Carnivore Diet. He is as I mentioned, doctor, medical doctor, former surgeon, served in the military, has a phenomenal Instagram following, and basically is revolutionized health and wellness in reference to the carnivore diet. So, Shawn, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. I always get excited to kind of talk to new folks and see what kind of audience we can reach. So thank you for having me.
And of course, we always have Dr. Brandon with us tonight, and tonight we want to focus on a diet, basically. And we'll start with Dr. Baker. I read your book, obviously, and for the audience, though, I thought, was there a moment in time where? Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention he's also a world record holder in the deadlift. And was there a moment in time that you just had enough and you decided to change? What was going on in your life at that point in time, and why the change?
Well, I mean, as you alluded to, I mean, as a physician, I'd spent, decades taking care of people, seeing the same old thing over and over. As an orthopedic surgeon, I thought, unwisely going into that specialty would sort of prevent me from dealing with the sort of the chronic disease, the lack of efficacy. One of the reasons I didn't go into primary care, because all I saw was physicians wallowing and complaining that their patients were never compliant. And so as a surgeon, I was like, well, it doesn't matter to me. I can just, take them to the OR and ram a nail down their femur, or, put plate and screws in, or, replace their knee, and it doesn't really matter. But what I soon realized that probably 80% of what I saw was just more and more of this chronic disease. And it was the same old thing. We get manifestations of metabolic syndrome, metabolic disease, whatever you want to call it, show up in different ways, and different specialties see that, whether it's nephrology or dermatology or in orthopedics, it's just arthritis, it's, tendon problems, peripheral neuropathy, so on and so forth. And so as I saw my own health start to dip, despite training extremely hard as an athlete and eating a relatively, quote unquote, healthy diet, I saw myself seeing those same things, and it just kind of pissed me off. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm an athlete. I'm a world champion athlete. I can't be sick. There's no way this can happen. And so I started to really look into nutrition art, because I hadn't really considered beyond just eat enough protein and don't eat a bunch of junk food. That was my kind of my operating, parameters where I kind of thought, as long as I train hard, I can do this. And then that worked for about 40 years. And by about 42 years, it didn't work anymore. And so and probably it didn't work 10 years before that, but I didn't figure it out until I was in my 40s. But I went through this journey on nutrition, and I started out with, the standard advice, which was, just eat a low fat diet, eat a low diet. I exercised like crazy. I did lose weight doing that, but I was absolutely frigging miserable. I mean, I was a horrible person to be around. The nurses at the hospital were like, we really like the heavier Dr. Baker a lot better, because you weren't such an asshole. I mean, it was just, I was hungry and tired and grouchy all the time, and I wasn't eating enough, and I was starving myself. I quickly realized that was not sustainable for me. So I, kind of just tried different diets, looked at different things, looked at a paleo diet, looked at low carb diets, looked at ketogenic diets, eventually landed on this, crazy all meat, crazy carnivore diet, which I've been doing now for almost 5 years now. But one of the things that sort of the tipping point for me was really, great. You can do whatever you want yourself. I kind of consider myself, I'm pretty disciplined. I've been a hard worker. Maybe not everybody wants to do that or can do that. And so, but what I started seeing was my patients, when I started changing their diet to a more low carb, meat based, ketogenic style diet, they actually had more success than I was having with other, with other options. And, quite honestly, I mean, I'm sure most physicians will agree, nutrition is not a physician's forte, and we're just not trained on that. You shouldn't go to a physician for nutritional advice, nor exercise advice, or really what I would consider health advice. I mean, if you're sick, yeah, that's where you want to go. That's where you can get your pills and shots and procedures, and you might get a pat on the back and maybe some platitudes, but you're not going to get real solid advice from these folks. And so what I started to see was in my patients that literally, I was going to schedule them. I had them on the schedule for joint replacements. Your knee looks horrible. I'm going to replace your knee. I would put them on a diet, and lo and behold, they would say, hey, doc, my knee doesn't hurt anymore. And it didn't make sense to me the first 2 times I saw it. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, let's delay your surgery, because the reason we're doing surgery is because you have pain. If you don't have pain, there's no reason to have a surgery, unless there was some crazy deformity. But generally, pain's the main indicator for these surgeries. And so as I started to see that happen over and over again, that sort of tipped me and said, wait a minute, there's something really here with regard to nutrition and disease. And I found out, it basically impacts every single disease out there. And I think those people that don't understand that they're really in the dark.
So let's kind of talk about current events a little bit. Dr. Brandon and the practice at Optimal Bio, they talk a lot about, diet and, staying healthy, especially during these COVID times. And, I noticed one of your Instagram feeds today, and also the CDC came out today saying that 80% of the people, that have either died from COVID or had severe symptoms from COVID are obese. And yet nobody in this country talks about nutrition and diet, from our esteemed health professionals in the government, to traditional doctors. So can both of you speak on that? I mean, why is it so ingrained in our society that we just simply don't talk about nutrition?
If you want to go first, that's fine. I might rant and.
Sir, why don't you, if people know me, I rant forever. Go. Listen to you, Dr. Baker.
All right. So, this is, I wouldn't say no one's talking about this, but no one in official capacity. We don't have, certified health authorities. We don't have the CDC. We don't have we don't have our infectious disease specialists. We don't have, any politicians really to any large extent talking about this. I mean, some of them are starting to mention it a little bit now, but this is a thing. This is an analogy I'll show you. We have had, well, one of the things that other physicians that say this, they say this out of frustration, but they're saying, we've been trying as physicians to combat obesity, metabolic syndrome for decades, and it just doesn't work. There's nothing we can do. They basically literally are throwing their hands up and saying, well, there's nothing you can do. Just everybody take a vaccine and, hope for the best. And I'm not going to say, vaccines are pro or con on that, but I think that the dismissal that you can actually impact people. I mean, I literally every day impact people's lives to where they lose weight, they get healthy, they they come off their meds for diabetes, they lose dozens, if not 100+ pounds. I mean, that's commonplace for me. And I'm just one guy, right? I'm just one guy. And if we look at, I use smoking as an example. In 1954, 45% of Americans smoked. Dwight David Eisenhower, I can't remember what president number he was, but he has a heart attack. He's smoking 4 packs a day. Suddenly we recognize in the 1960s that, hey, smoking might be bad for us. We launch a government campaign saying smoking's a problem. By the 70s, we've got a lot of policies in place. Smoking is largely looked upon as a problem. It's considered universally a problem. And now we have a smoking rate of around 15%. So we have effectively almost shut down smoking, with enough messaging. If I look at the way this pandemic has been handled, I mean, there has been so many resources poured into the message, social distance, wear a mask, get a vaccine when you're available. That is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on every TV channel, on every commercial, on every storefront window, every shop. You walk on the floor and there's some stickers everywhere on the ground. I mean, it's like everywhere. If we were to spend 1/10 of that just telling people stop eating ultra processed junk food, get out and exercise. I mean, they're showing on the video, they're showing the horrible people dying of, COVID-19, scaring people. I mean, I'm not saying that's wrong or right, but if you were to put a similar amount of effort into that, like we did with smoking, like we're doing with COVID, we could impact metabolic disease significantly. We are, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We have enough resources to do it, and I don't think there's a guru, a quack, or anybody, whatever you want to call these people, they'll disagree that ultra processed food is a problem. We all know it is, and yet we sit there and accept it. And get your coronavirus shot and get a free Krispy Kreme donut. Or it's breast cancer aware this week. Let's have a bake sale and everybody eat cake and cookies. This is a huge problem. And it's like literally, and the message we see among most dietitians and and folks as well, moderation is fine. the problem is those foods aren't designed to be eaten in moderation. The food companies know this. They intentionally design that so you can't just eat one, like Lay's potato chips famously said. I think it was Lay's, maybe it was Pringles, but I don't know. One of those, is just you cannot eat these things one at a time. And we know that. Kevin Hall's study showing ultra processed food people unconsciously eat another 400 or 500 calories a day. This is a known quantity. And to not say that this is something that is a problem. When I go, when I was in France, I saw a TV and there was a commercial for some kind of junk food. And at the bottom of the screen, there was a warning, this is junk food. Don't eat it. It'll make you sick. We don't have that here in the US. Just a minor amount of effort that we could put in, we could make a significant difference. But, like I said,
Well,
I think it's where funding is. It's
metabolic disease. The metabolic disease, though, it goes back to 77 when the government got through with staff, the food pyramid. You look back at the food pyramid, we started becoming high carb, low fat, which led to this metabolic disease. And that goes to a quote I have here. If people let the government decide what foods they eat and what medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in a sorry state as all the souls who live under tyranny. Thomas Jefferson. And I think part of the problem is we want to centralize everything with 330 million people, or the WHO with 7 billion people. We're individuals. And the idea that the most important person on your health or any aspect of your life is in the mirror. And we want to defer to these so-called experts who aren't experts because they use the power of the government to influence and enhance their bank accounts by getting contracts to the government or whatever the problem is. So I think when the government got involved in our healthcare, it's actually destroyed our healthcare, and then people do prosper on that. So it's just very frustrating to hear these so-called Ivy Tower experts say something that's incorrect, because you and I were trained, like you talk about nutrition. We had no classes in medical school at all. We learned because we saw a patient base be sick. My specialty in obstetrics and gynecology was diabetes. And when I learned after reading Mark Sisson's book, Primal Blueprint, I started applying that to my patients, was the antithesis to the American Diet Association. And I had patients who were on insulin with their first baby, not just not be insulin, but now they're losing weight, having regular cycles, getting pregnant, and by the way, passed the glucose test, because we've been trained that this is a so-called expert. And that gets very frustrating to me. That's why the individualization of healthcare, so I really believe medical liberty is going to put us together. This RD stuff is garbage, but medical liberty, your freedom to choose your body, what you can do for your healthcare, is going to be the impetus for true liberty, I think.
Yeah, I think, the fact that we have USDA guidelines, the first one came out, I think it was in 80 or 81, and that was after McGovern's 77 policy, where he just says, I don't have time to wait for the science. I'm a politician. I got to make a decision right now. And so that fateful moment, and I'm sure there was some conflicts of interest there. I mean, basically what the USDA, and, the USDA is funded largely by agriculture. I mean, this is their funding source, and it's grain-based agriculture. This is a huge conflict of interest. And so, I mean, basically the dietary guidelines serve nothing more than to ensure a profit stream for particular industries. And they don't particularly inform people what they should eat individually. I mean, unfortunately, school lunch programs, any kind of federal program is set up on this. And, the problem is it trickles down into medical knowledge. This is why we're so perhaps cholesterol centric in our medical paradigm, which is missing the boat. I mean, I don't know if you saw the recent analysis of the Women's Health Study that looked at risk factors for cardiovascular disease, and I mean, it was like diabetes was a 10.6 odds ratio, whereas elevated cholesterol was like 1.3. I mean, the difference was enormous. And if we look at what impacts that, it's a difference. Dietarily, it's a huge difference in that. And so I think that the problem, within the medical system, can you fix it? I don't know if it's possible. I mean, within the current allopathic medical healthcare system, I think it's so independently, they're so dependently intertwined with pharmaceutical companies and so on and so forth. I don't know if there's a way to fix that system. I think, do you have an alternate system in place? Will the market dictate that? I think I get better results for people just going online and talking to them about health and nutrition than many hospital systems do. And that's a sad reality. And I don't have any resources. I mean, I got, what I can make my own. It's not, it's just getting out there and being vocal. And, if you get to a point where we have a free and fair competitive market, I mean, people are going to go to where they get healthy. And I think that's probably going to be the answer. I'm not going to depend upon.
We've seen that in this past year, what people are looking for in that fearful state. What can they do? And we're being, we are trained, I trained allopathic, but also at the same time, we learned about nutrition study. We've seen things with natural hormones, with the right kind of diet. We're seeing improvement, and those kind of practices are good because people are searching that out.
So obviously the goal is to get somebody to be as healthy as possible. So let's just take so I had a little story for you. A former coworker of mine who did a ton of traveling for us, and I was in the clinical research business, and she would go to these hospitals and monitor clinical trials in oncology. And I didn't know this at the time, but she had an autoimmune disease, and she would fly, and then she would, land, and she could barely walk, and very debilitating, fatigue, the whole deal. And so she decides to take matters in her own hands after many years of medications and everything else. And she goes, Jim, I went on a carnivore diet, and Shawn Baker inspired me to go on this diet. And she also moved to Hawaii, to a much more, warmer climate than North Carolina. And she's a new woman at this point in time. So for those that are looking to make the change, I know you talk about it in your book, but can you kind of walk through a simple potential plan, for somebody who's eating a traditional diet, let's say, that thinks they have to eat a lot of vegetables because everybody tells you their vegetables are good for you, but they have some carbs and they have the tiny little piece of meat or the tiny little piece of chicken or salmon. How do they transition, to this carnivore diet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I'm going to say, I don't know that everybody has to do it. I don't know if it's the be all end all. We're still figuring that stuff out, but I do know, and I see the patient you talked about every single day: rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, depression, PTSD. I mean, I see all of these things. These people are new people after doing this, and at least some of them are. And like I said, we're trying to figure out, if there's any nuances behind that. But as far as, what I think is, the first thing is what causes many people to fail on any diet is that, one, they're hungry all the time. Two, they don't like what they're eating. So I think that's step one. You have to kind of fill in those gaps. And so in the beginning of this diet, particularly, and that's why I don't really like talking about weight loss as much. I mean, there's lots of ways to lose weight. You can just not eat and lose weight. I mean, there's, how sustainable that is or how pleasurable it is. That's a different topic. But I tell people in the beginning, just get a variety of different sources of animal foods. Meats typically. I think red meat is fairly essential for most people. I think having enough fat in there, because if you don't have carbohydrates, you need some sort of energy source. So getting enough fat, have enough variety, and just enjoy it, and eat till satisfied, eat till satiated. If you're still hungry, eat some more. Do that for a few months, and that'll get you past these cravings, these sort of this sort of hopeless sort of power that the processed foods have, because I mean they taste good, they're everywhere, they're ubiquitous, you get rewarded, they're treats for us, right? Good job, here's a lollipop, or here's an ice cream, or I'm going to reward myself for this. You've got to get past that phase. I think that's step one. Once you've done that, then you can kind of sort of tailor things and tighten things up a little bit if you need to. I think the people that have done this the longest and been most successful have kept it very simple. It's just eat some meat, get enough fat, eat enough till you're full, and that eventually works. Now, there's people that will maybe complicate it or tell you need to do this or that. That hasn't borne out over the long term. I know there's people that are really insistent that you have to have this ratio, you have to eat certain organ meats, and you have to do this and that. The data that I've seen, and I've probably seen more data than anybody else with this, because I've actually tracked this, and we've done survey data on over 10,000 people that show that there doesn't seem to be a difference. Harvard University, who's actually done a study of 2,000 people, are participating in that study, and that hasn't been published yet, but I've seen the data that will also show that there's no difference between people just eating plain old ground beef and those that are eating organs and the highest quality of this and that. So I think that's important to realize and understand. You don't have to spend a ton of money. Do what you can. Now, the environmental impact, and that's a different argument. When we're talking purely about human health, I mean, if all you can afford is, a little bit of, the cheapest ground beef at Walmart, and it becomes between that and eating the Lucky Charms in the cereal aisle, 100% go eat the ground beef from Walmart. You're going to be fine with that, most likely. So, I mean, to start, I tell people, get a variety, find things you like. Don't, if I told you had to eat, like there's some people are eating raw meat. I said, if I had to tell you had to eat a bowl of raw ground meat every day, I mean, I wouldn't do that diet. That would be the least appealing thing. So find something that you really enjoy. make it fun, make it exciting. Maybe, you can put a few spices here and there initially until it helps you transition in. You might have to drop those spices later. If you find that they're causing a problem. This is the thing we talked about vegetables. I'm not anti-vegetable or anti-carb. I'm just saying that some people have reactions to these foods. Carbohydrates, I mean, glucose is not a problem in the right amount. I mean, my body makes it. I mean, we need to have glucose. I mean, my blood glucose is never zero, even though I don't eat carbohydrates without rare exception. So I'm not anti-carb. I'm not anti-plant necessarily. I'm just saying that you should be aware of the effects that foods have on you. And sometimes they're subtle. I remember when I was practicing, I would have people tell me the grains bother their knees. And I always thought they were crazy. I think, what are you crazy? Go away, quacko. Let me put another out. These are the people that have, and Dr. Brandon will say, these are people that have, an allergy list of 17 things. You always see those patients as like, okay, another one of these, and it's just the way it was. But at the end of the day, they're probably being truthful. And I discovered that out myself. And I've seen that over and over again, that certain foods cause certain issue, whether it's a skin issue or a mental health issue or a joint issue. And so we just have to be cognizant of that and not give any food a free pass. Just because it's a vegetable doesn't mean it's got this halo on it that's, inviolate. And you just, oh, it's a vegetable, therefore I can eat it without any concern. There's people that are going into renal failure from, their green smoothies when they're chugging down, copious amounts of oxalate. So enjoy the food, learn how to cook. Gosh, learn how to cook a decent steak if you don't know. If you don't know how to cook, and this is something I saw that was really eye-opening and a little bit disturbing. There was a study looking at, I think it was millennials, or maybe, I guess it's millennials. What's the next generation after? Maybe it's Generation Z, I guess. Who's after millennials? Anyway, the concern was they weren't eating enough breakfast cereal. And you think, well, that's cool. We don't eat breakfast cereal, is basically junk. But the reason wasn't why you thought it was. It wasn't because they were concerned it was unhealthy. They were concerned they weren't eating breakfast cereal because it was too much work for them. They had to wash a dish. They had to rinse that bowl in the sink, so they package they can open, throw it in their mouth and throw the thing in the trash can. This is what we've come to. So we've got to bring back, the basic survival skill, how to feed yourself and how to cook and not just rely on DoorDash or Uber Eats or, picking up your phone. So I think that's, step one, just eat enough, enjoy it. Let it just relax. Don't stress about it. Don't worry about counting calories and carbs and macros and when to eat and mealtime. Don't worry about that in the beginning. Just enjoy meat. Get some steak and eggs and enjoy it. Bacon and eggs, throw a piece of cheese on there if you like it, and go with that for a while. And then you'll transition. And then you can kind of play with it. But transition time should just be, I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to eat what I enjoy. So
how do you both overcome the guilt factor? I love steak, so it's a treat for me. And, but when you're eating it, you're thinking, oh man, I can't only have one piece of beef during the week because my doc says my cholesterol is going to blow up. It's too much fat. My arteries are going to get hard. So you both see patients, talk to patients. How do you overcome those fears or these guilt sensations that some of these people have?
I'll go real quick on this. Is cholesterol, we do at Optimal Bio, we have a wellness program, adrenal program, bioidentical hormones, but I spend more time talking about nutrition, and the word and the phrase that comes up in every talk is, what's my cholesterol, doc? Even though that's the smallest part. So I spend time explaining to them 25% of the body's cholesterol is in the brain, 80% of the brain's cholesterol, 50% of all cell membranes, all sex hormones. And I try to tell them what cholesterol does. And I spend some time talking about Ansel Keys' study to let them understand that it's not cholesterol is the problem. And so I hope the guilt goes away, and the atherosclerosis studies and stuff like that. So I spend time doing that. I think it's important for people to understand that. And we give them, at our office, we give them a lot of scientific papers. I want people walking. Well, I want to be an educator. I want people to be their best health trainer themselves. That's what we do here.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you said, I thought you were saying personally how I cope with eating steak and the guilt, and I say I don't have any guilt about it at all. But when it comes to people, because I get the same question, and I'm constantly a message on social media. Hey, look at my cholesterol and this, and I'm like, look, I need more context. Like I said, I'm not there to dismiss and say cholesterol is not relevant and has no importance whatsoever. But I think we have to put it in perspective. We have to realize that there is some context there. Is the cholesterol in the background of a very inflamed, metabolically unhealthy person with hyperglycemia or hyperinsulinemia? Are they suffering from, do they have a lot of visceral fat? Those things are important. When we look at, cardiovascular disease, blood pressure, obviously there's sex and age and smoking history and family history. They're going to play a role in that. But I think, just trying to frame it in a bigger picture and say, look, if you are overweight, and many people, so many people are, and you say, look, if I get you to lose 50 pounds, you have dropped your cardiovascular disease risk immensely. I don't care what your cholesterol does at this point. You have already improved yourself. Now, it doesn't mean there are things you can't continue to work on, but you've already, just by virtue of that weight loss, have done remarkable. You've done wonders for your longevity and your resilience to cardiovascular disease. The thing is that I think that these biomarkers that we have, unfortunately, as many people are hopefully are aware, that these numbers are very fluid. Your cholesterol on Tuesday may be very different from what it is on Friday. I mean, it just changes day to day. And the fact that we're making decisions, depending on whatever the algorithm threshold is my LDL above 190? Well, it was 184, so it's good today, but next week it was 192. So therefore I'm on a statin the rest of my life. That is not very good medicine. I think that's very lazy. And I think you have to look into what does the overall risk package look like? Who am I talking to? Examine your patient, talk to your patient, find out what's going on, see what kind of diet they're on. I mean, that will have an impact, whether it's relative or not. And then I think there's some imaging studies, coronary calcium scan, carotid intermediate thickness testing, with the Doppler, that can better inform us as to what's actually going on with our vascular tree, rather than sort of looking at these markers, which may or may not have the same relevance in all people. So it tends to be a long discussion, and hopefully, you would think, I guess we get a little isolated in our little worlds, our little pockets of people that think alike. We think, oh, but everybody knows this by now. But the reality is only a small percentage of people, even physicians, actually even think this way. The most physicians, as Dr. Brandon will probably concede, I mean, it's a grind. I mean, it's patient after patient after patient after patient, depending what kind of practice you're in. You don't have time or the luxury to take time and get the nuance. It's just like, here's in the EMR, electronic medical records will give you a little clue. Here's a little red flag. Oh, their cholesterol's high. Don't forget to prescribe the Lipitor or whatever. And I mean, that's how medicine is done. And there's not much thought given to that. It's just a reflex rather than a thoughtful discussion, which is, I think it requires that. So anytime somebody comes to me and flashes me their labs, I'm like, interesting. If you want me to discuss this in detail, we need more information. And many people are happy to have that discussion. I think.
You also talk about, this moment in time testing, but then if you're getting a physical, they usually make you fast, for at least 12 hours beforehand. And you had mentioned something in your book about the liver producing, when you're hungry, for example, you haven't eaten, the liver's producing more cholesterol, I guess, and therefore it could elevate your cholesterol. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like fasting studies, for instance, part of that, there's sort of a thought about an energy flux, we're constantly transporting energy, to our cells in need. And so when we are in a relatively fasted state, we need energy to get to those cells. And so our liver is very nicely able to create glucose through gluconeogenesis. It's also able to package and transport lipids through things like de novo lipogenesis and its regular functions. And so we often see a higher trafficking. In fact, there's studies looking at fasting, like people fasting for a week will have a total cholesterol that's increased by something like 30 to 70% from fasting. And so you're saying, well, if I'm not eating anything, why is my cholesterol going up? And if that's true, then is that bad too? And so, I mean, we've got this sort of backwards way of looking at things. The cholesterol is bad in all situations, even though doing things that reportedly are good, are not giving you the same result. We've seen studies where people will say that, these coronary calcium scans, which actually show disease, can be high in people with high levels of cholesterol. And the people that are looking at that will say, well, then obviously that test is no good because we have all of our faith on this blood cholesterol test. Everything is centered around this one test. And you'd think in 2021, people will like to say that, and even most lipidologists will say, look, maybe it's the ApoB fragment, maybe it's lipoprotein little a, maybe it's, the particle size or the oxidation percentage of the lipoproteins and so on and so forth. But still, the average physician, I mean, it's such a myopic focus on one minor, I mean, I would say minor, I mean, but one biomarker that has so much context behind it.
So you talk about the coronary artery calcium scan. Is that an easy test to get if you request it with your doctor, or are they going to fight you on it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on the physician, but generally, and it may not be covered by insurance, but it's generally inexpensive, and you don't need a doctor to get it in. It might be all states, but maybe if not, certainly most states in the U.S. I mean, I'm in California. I looked online where can I get a CAC test, and there was a guy 5 miles away. I paid $100 and, I got my test. It was nothing. I didn't need it. I mean, a doctor met with me and talked to me about, he tried to upsell me a whole body scan. I'm like, no, I don't need that crap. But it was just like, yeah, but it was no big deal. I mean, it was just you can get it very easily if you want it. And some physicians will order it. Some physicians will understand the significance. Some will just say, no, it's not necessary. I think the American American Heart Association rather has come out with guidelines regarding coronary calcium scan, and it modifies the risk, and they are using it somewhat. So they're being more accepting of that. I know, I think if you're president, you have to have one. If you're an astronaut, you have to have one. I think certain people in high profile places are required to get this as a test. And some people think it is the creme de la creme of cardiac risk assessment test. That's debatable, but there are many people that believe that.
I had mine done in September. But everything we're talking about right here, the key thing is hypertension in inflammation. We have three pathophysiologies: vascular injury, immune response, and inflammation, right? So whatever we want to do, we want to lower inflammation markers. That's the key, whatever this is. And the crux again then is the high glucose, even hyperinsulinemia. That's when we talk about this kind of diet you're doing and talking about, which is beautiful. It's an anti-inflammatory diet. You talked about knee pain. One of my specialties was pelvic pain as a gynecologist. And the first thing I would do, starting about 12 years ago, was take people off all grains. They thought I was crazy. I said, come back in a month. See if we need laparoscopy. Because my goal as a surgeon is to not do surgery. That's my goal. That's the last respect. I'd say 90% of women that brought in for that, when they did the diet properly, they stopped eating grains. Complicated. Then I came back 30 days later, they're not having surgery. And then it's amazing what these kind of foods can do to our bowels. Our bowel is the window to the rest of our body. But it's the key is to get those inflammation markers out of our body.
Yeah, I think that the point about the gut, if you think about it, and most people don't understand it, but the gut is actually external to our body. We are basically wrapped around this tube, which is external to our body. So from our mouth to our anus, that's external to our body. And we have a huge immune interface. There's a tremendous, high percentage of our immune system is in our gut interface. And that gut, unlike our skin, our gut is designed to bring in what we put in our mouth, whereas our skin is designed basically to repel pretty much everything. And so our gut is our main interface with the environment. And so when that is in compromise, either through microbiome, the microbiome being dysbiotic, or, gut permeability being disturbed for various reasons, you see a host of problems with this. And it's not surprising, that you see the pain going away. And that's one thing I see. Joint pain, and I've seen women with endometriosis and other chronic pelvic pain resolve on diet. And this is the thing about this this meat-based diet. You can argue the merits or the positive benefit, but what it unequivocally does is it gets rid of junk food. There's no doubt about it. There's no processed food in there. It is something that is high in protein, and I think protein is important for health in general. It is very bioavailable. It is very satiating, so people tend not to overeat it. So there's a number of reasons why people are having success in that. And I think it's generally irritant free. I think when we look at food sensitivity testing, particularly red meat, very rarely is a factor. It's usually something else. It's usually, even within the animal world, there's people that have allergies to dairy and shellfish and chicken and pork and things like that, but we rarely see it with beef. And so that's something that I think is just, very interesting. It seems to be very easy on the gut.
You talk about intermittent feasting, and Dr. Brandon talks about intermittent fasting. Can you both discuss the benefits of, not eating every, 6 to 8 hours? And from your perspective, Dr. Baker, the feasting piece of it, where I think you mentioned you had 6 pounds of meat or something like that, and then you didn't eat for 30 hours. So can you both kind of talk about that whole feasting, fasting thing and how it all plays with the gut and what have you?
I'll go real quick first, Jim, on this one is that I like this, the phrase time restricted feeding better, but people don't get that. So they hear the time restricted fasting, but it's within that hours of time you eat. As you talked about, we don't talk about macros or we talk about no calories. We're talking about enjoy your eating, find your window to eat. And I'll let Dr. Baker get more detail, but we talk about autophagy and microphagy. But the key thing is restricting that time in which you eat, give your body an opportunity not to be pumping out insulin. Insulin is great when it's necessary, but it's a culprit in a hyperinsulinemic state.
Yeah, I think that the intermittent fasting, which is we hear a lot about. I think a key component of the fasting is what you're eating. I mean, I think the eating part is every bit as important, because I think that there's something called physiologic fasting, which we do every night when we sleep. But I mean, there's a point where you're not hungry, and this is where it becomes effortless. And I think what you eat makes it that way. And I think that's an important concept. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that humans, long time ago, we can put it back 5,000 years or 150,000 years, depending on what your beliefs are. But as humans were nomadic, it would probably be inconvenient to stop every 2 hours to have a snack. I just don't, particularly if you wanted to heat them up and, you weren't carrying microwaves and Tupperware dishes around, you had to build a fire, you had to, so I suspect the meal was probably a once a day event, probably maybe twice a day, but probably once a day. So I think that's kind of how we're set up. And I think, the other thing is if you look at how certain foods are digested, if you eat a big bolus of meat, if I eat a big old ribeye steak, it's going to take a long time, many hours to go from my 4 hours in my stomach, another, 10, 12, 16 hours in my small intestine to extract all that nutrition. Whereas if I eat a candy bar or a piece of sugar, I mean, that's in and out very rapidly. And so we kind of have this differential way in which our incretin hormones, which are stimulated, I think they're designed to act in a very sequential temporal fashion. You've got GIP being activated in the upper gut, GLP-1 activated in the lower gut. And so when you kind of override that with this high concentration of nutrients, whether it's, some cheap refined carbohydrate, and mind you, we never ate cheap refined carbohydrates before, even if you believe we were out munching leaves and stuff like that, which, there's probably some evidence we did that to some degree. But what we do now is we eat powder. I mean, we literally powderize food. It's something our teeth could never do. I think the most processing we should be able to do is what our teeth can do. I mean, that just seems to make sense. When you have powderized, concentrated energy, whether it's protein powder, whether it's refined flour, refined sugars, that overwhelms our digestive capacity in a way that we're not designed to have. And I think this is where we set up metabolic disease. And I think that's, that is a huge part, of this.
That's interesting, because when you're drinking the fruit smoothies or the vegetable smoothies, you're not chewing, obviously, it's going right into your gut. And from a simple non-medical person, I interpret that as you're shocking the system. There's no warning, because when you're chewing, maybe the body has a warning that there's going to be food coming down soon. And when you're just gulping down a shake in, 2 or 3 minutes, it sounds like your body doesn't have any time to process and digest it properly. So it just goes right back out.
Yeah, I mean, there's something called the cephalic phase of digestion. We learn about that in medical school. I'm sure Dr. Brandon remembers, but just seeing food, smelling food, you start to salivate, you've got lipase, you've got salivary lipase and amylases, and you start to rev up the system. But yeah, when you just slam a smoothie or a processed food product real quick, there probably is some sort of, dysregulation that's going on. I'm not sure if just the fact that it's processed food is probably bad enough, but yeah, you've probably also got that factor. But yeah, we do have a preparatory phase of digestion that occurs called the cephalic phase of digestion. And so, yes, you are right about the smoothies, the smoothie culture. Yeah.
So a couple questions we got from our listeners and that have, pre-populated. So we're going to kind of do some rapid fire things in the next 15 minutes or so. Typical, I know in your book, you map out kind of a 7-day, menu, so to speak. But can you just kind of walk us through, what a typical 7 days for you looks like right now?
Well, for me, it's pretty boring because I get up and eat about 4 pounds of meat and I'm done for the day. I mean, that's that's mine. But I mean, I think for the average person doing, I'd say 90% of the people that do this diet over a period of time generally eat about twice a day. The amount varies a little bit from person to person. Body habit, body size, activity level are going to have some impact on this. There are period times, particularly during transition period, people sometimes are voraciously hungry because they're just catching up on nutrition. I would, contrary to what many people would think, I think obesity is a problem of malnutrition. And you think, well, how can somebody who's obese be malnourished? Well, they aren't calorie deprived, but they are nutritionally deprived. They're probably lacking protein and vitamins and a myriad of other things. And so they're just constantly consuming calories because they're always hungry. And so what happens is, I think when you initially get this high quality nutrition, your body's like, wow, give me more of that. And some people, I've seen women, 110, 120-pound women, that are putting down 5 pounds of meat in one setting. And they do that for a while and then it evens out. Then they're like, well, okay, now I'm back to where I need to be. But I think, I don't remember exactly what I wrote in the book. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but, probably, something like 2 meals a day, maybe a snack in there if somebody needs that. I'm not a big fan of snacking. I don't really have to, I usually don't feel a need to snack, but, usually people can find some sort of, steak and eggs or bacon and eggs, or, a little bit of seafood if you like it, kind of a rotation in there. And, pork can be fine. I think there's a lot of, experimentation in that phase. So, I mean, but generally I'd say most people 2 meals a day. And if I'd say an average person, and I put this in there and I put strong caveats around it. This is by no means an absolute guideline, but the average size male is going to eat about 2 pounds of meat a day. And the average female is going to eat about 1.5 pounds. And you could, divide it up into eggs and meat and however you want to do it. But there's wild variability within that, but that's just kind of a guideline. I tend to be a little bit at least protein centric in my thinking. I think that there's a certain amount of protein most people should get. There's some people that tend to be more lipocentric, where they think fat is more important and protein is kind of minimal. Maybe my athletic background is kind of throwing a bias into that, but I like to see people putting on muscle and preserving muscle, and so I tend to guide people to a higher protein amount. And then for some reason, some diabetics might do better with a little less protein for a while until they kind of normalize or improve their metabolic health. But so yeah, that's kind of an outline. I know it's not specific, but it was kind of funny. I didn't write a diet. I didn't write a recipe book. I intentionally didn't do that. I'm not the world's greatest chef. I'm not like Chef Shawn Baker that's going to show you 95 ways to cook a ribeye steak. I mean, I didn't feel a need to do that, but most people can figure that part out pretty easily.
I think you bring up a good point too, that, muscle mass is not about vanity. It's about, making sure that your body continues with muscle mass through the later stages in life, 60, 70, 80 years old, because as Dr. Brandon always says, seems like the number one cause of accidents are just people falling down, and that leads to hip replacements, and that eventually leads, if you're older, into an assisted living facility. And then, you got 18 months and it's usually, it's curtains at that point in time. So can you both kind of talk a little bit about, maintaining this muscle mass as you get older in life?
I think to have muscle mass is crucial. If correct in the studies I've read, number 4 cause of death at the age of 60 is falling down. And Jim, when you and I are hanging out around 75 years of age, we're not going to say, gosh, I wish I had less muscle. So the time to do it is now. And a lot of the disease process, kidney disease, things like that, doctors say, classically trained doctors say, don't do protein. Protein puts stress on the kidneys. No, it's a filter losing protein. All of us are made from protein. Without that protein source as our building block, I think that's why protein is such healing. As a surgeon, when I was in Africa in 2007 doing surgery, you could see their lack of, when I was opening their bellies up, their bodies, their lack of protein led to such very bad tissue, because protein is necessary as a building block for our bodies. So I think protein is an essential part to healing. So I think build our strength now where we can, so that when we can age gracefully.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, there was a recent study, I think one of the dermatology journals looked at scar healing in vegans, and saw significant problems. A lot of wound diastases, where the wound opens up, and atrophic scar healing where they don't have a robust healing response. And so we see that over and over again with protein. And all of us were trained to look at albumin and nutritional status, and we know that their levels are a certain level they're not going to do surgically, but we didn't have a dietary strategy. It was refer this to the dietitian, and they put them on, Ensure, they give them some kind of TPN or something like that, which is garbage, typically some seed oil garbage. But I think with regard to strength and muscle mass and longevity, there's quite a bit of data that points to preserving, particularly strength. And I think that's the metric most people have seen the most association with longevity. And there's a Honolulu longevity study which showed that, if you were in the top quartile for grip strength, and grip strength maybe not the best measure of body strength, but it's a decent proxy. You had something like a 250% likelihood of reaching to 100 years of age. So, I mean, strength is very, very important. And muscle mass is certainly correlated to strength. I mean, they don't correlate 100%, but yes, keeping muscle mass on you is incredibly important, and particularly as you get older, and just for quality of life. You don't want to be the guy that needs his bags carried from the grocery store. I mean, or you're stuck on it, you're kyphotic and walking around with a walker at 72 years of age. I mean, that's no quality of life. I mean, you should be, climbing mountains at that age, as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, you've got to maintain muscle mass. You've got to do, and it's diet has a big role in that. Strength training is equally important. So we have to, I know we're focusing on diet, but I think exercise, strength training, all these things are wonderfully important, for everyone to do.
So a lot of these diets follow this 90-10 rule, where you stick to 90% of the diet, and every once in a while you can indulge and cheat. So if you, one of the questions from, again, our patients is, hey, do you ever cheat? And if so, what do you cheat with?
Is that directly to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is a good question. So, I don't sort of plan to cheat. I don't have like a cheat meal week or day or whatever. I don't sit and do that. I have had on my children's birthday, not all the time and not every one of them, but in the last 5 years, I think I've had 3 or 4 pieces of cake on my kid's birthday. If I'm going to come off my diet, it's not going to be for broccoli, because I don't even like broccoli. I mean, this is like, I'll have a piece of cake every once in a great while. And I mean, literally it's every once in a great while. It's like 6-8 months, and I remember I had one time on my son's birthday and I got violently sick. I was just like, something's in this food that I'm not used to. I'm not used to eating this, whatever's in it. Anytime you pick up a cake, there's 75 ingredients on there, unless you make it yourself. Right. So, I mean, I was literally in the backyard puking my guts out. I was like, well, this sucks. And then my daughter had a birthday, I don't know, it was, 8 months later. And I said, oh, okay, I'll have a little piece of cake. And I did okay with that one. But it's not something, like I said, I'm not a vegan. I'm not a reverse vegan. This isn't dogma to me. This isn't ideology. This is, what are you going to do to live, as happy as you want to be. And, like I said, it's up to you, the 90-10 rule. If it works for you, it's fine. The problem is, for most people, the 90-20 rule becomes a 50-50 rule, or the 10-90 rule. I mean, that's the problem is you've got so many people that are hopelessly, whatever, they've got these food addictions. And this is why I talk about the beginning, getting over these food addictions. But these people that, they go on a diet for 3-4 months and then they do well, but they don't really solve that food addiction issue. And then that 10%, I'm just gonna give myself a cheat day, becomes a cheat week, and then it becomes a lifestyle pattern again. And so if you can't refrain from that, then don't bother. And I think it's like, I don't know how many reformed heroin addicts are out there that are just shooting up occasionally. I mean, there's probably not many. Maybe there's a few out there, but I don't know how many people can do that. And food, I mean, quite honestly, I mean, I think the analogy is valid. I think the process of food particularly is very drug-like. And I think there's people that have serious problems and addictions with that. And I think the problem is it's ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It is legal, and it's encouraged. And so it's kind of like, that's a tough one to deal with. And so you've got to be very, you've got to have a very, very good resolve physiologic. And so you have to have the physiology. I think the physiology's got to be there first place. You can't be hungry. You can't walk by the office break room with cakes and be hungry all the time. You are eventually going to cave. So you have to figure that out. And that's the physio. That's why I tell people, just eat enough steak, get a bunch of fatty ribeyes and whatever, eat till you're full, eat till you don't care about anything. And if they ask me, how much do I need to eat? I say, eat till you don't want cupcakes anymore, or whatever, fill in your blank food. That strategy works, to get people to this transition period. But, as far as, I will tell you that, when I did study, when we look at, again, we've got survey data on this stuff, and hopefully we'll formalize some of this stuff in scientific studies, but with 10,000 people, we've got people that are different degrees of compliance, 70%, 80%, 90%, and 100%. And we watch the number of people, the efficacy for, improvements in certain conditions, diseases coming off medications. And from 70% to 80% went up pretty high. And then 80 to 90 was a pretty decent jump. And then from 90 to 100 was a small jump. It wasn't that big. So there's some wiggle room in there. But what we see is, that for certain conditions, you've got to be more strict. And I think some people with severe autoimmune disease, severe gut diseases and things like that, like you can treat run of the mill generic vanilla diabetes. There's a lot of ways to make that better.
Sure.
I mean, we don't do that very successfully in medicine because we're stupid. But I mean, there's, if you just do a decent diet, most people are going to improve that to some degree. But some of these really tricky problems like these autoimmune diseases, I've seen something like Ehlers-Danlos, which really freaked me out that got better. I mean, this is a connective tissue disorder where it's a genetic disorder where people just don't produce connective tissue in the correct or collagen in the correct way. And they have lax joints. And I had another physician, in fact, she was a 57-year-old emergency room physician, was literally waking up every single morning with 2, 3, 4 joints completely dislocated. So her morning ritual was put her shoulder back in place, put her ankle back in place, put on her clothes, go to work. Maybe something pops out of work, has to put it back in and work while she's working as an ER physician. Been dealing with this for decades. She went on a carnivore diet. Within 1 month, she's like, my joints stopped dislocating.
Wow.
A few months later that she's in the gym lifting weights. She's now lost 40 pounds, has not had a dislocation in years now. This was just mind blowing to me. And I was trying to figure out how the hell could it affect a genetic tissue disorder, but somehow it does. And maybe it's an epigenetic, modifier of the genetic expression, but it's just, anyway, I forgot the original point of the question. I tend to ramble, but
it's all right. You were fine. So you brought your kids up earlier. First off, how is your son? Because I know you mentioned him in the book. And secondly, for the parents out there, for both of you, what are some of the tips that should you put your kids on all carnivore diets at this point in time? Obviously, we're going to keep them away from cereal and get them back to eating animal products and so on and so forth. But for those parents out there that tend to be a little bit weaker with their kids, what are some of the tips and techniques you can pass on?
Well, I don't necessarily say that kids need to be on a carnivore diet. I think some kids would benefit for sure. If you've got a kid that's already on the way to having problems, maybe it's, type 2 diabetes at a very young age. We see these 8, 9-year-olds. It's tragic to see this. Kids that are developing autoimmune disorders, certain kids that have some weird things. This may be an opportunity to do that. I think that, kids are obviously in this critical growth time, particularly early, the younger they are, the more critical that growth is. And so it's particularly early on, high quality, nutrient dense food, animal fats, animal proteins, essential for brain development and growth. If we look at wild mammals and, you look at weaning times, and there's studies have been done on this, and they look at humans tend to wean very early as a primate species. Orangutans tend to top out. They tend to wean for about 8 years or so. Wild humans, about 2 years is what an indigenous tribe human would breastfeed for. But despite that, we have this huge brain, a relatively huge brain, 1,200, 1,300 cc brain relative to another primate, which might have 300 cc brain. And the only way eating natural wild foods that you can do that and support that brain growth is through concentrated nutrients, i.e. animal fats. Now, modern times, again, we have this hyper processing of energy. So we can make powdered, formulas and rice cereals and stuff that's really concentrated energy that we couldn't normally get. So a carnivorous, at least carnivorous heavy diet is probably appropriate for kids. Now, one of the things I found, is, when many people, you've got kids, and I mean, it's like every 15 minutes they're hungry. I mean, it's like, Dad, if you got multiple of them, then it's not all on the same schedule. So you spend all day handing out snacks. Here's a granola bar, here's a fruit juice, here's a this and that and that and that. And it's just exhausting. What I do with my kids is I round them up on Saturday morning. I'm like, bacon, eggs, I'll make some kind of, I might make a chaffle, which is a cheese and egg-based waffle, and I'll load them up on animal foods and fats. And I don't hear from them for 6, 8 till dinner time. I mean, they're good. That's a hack. I mean, that's a lifestyle made easier for parents hack. You just get them to load up, and it takes a few whiles to get them used to that. But once they fill up, they're out of your hair and they're getting good nutrition. And like I said, if they want to have a piece of fruit, if they want to have a vegetable, if they want, it's kind of fun. My kids, it's kind of interesting because my kids, they have no problem eating steaks. In fact, my daughters particularly I almost regret doing this. I taught them about, this is a ribeye steak, and here's here's the spinalis part that's really tasty. And my little daughter is always, hey, Dad, I want that part of your steak. So now I'm like, God damn it. Of course, I give it to her, but but then like I said, they will sometimes they'll ask for, they'll have meat, they'll have eggs, they might have some dairy, they'll sometimes ask for some fruit. But they almost never ask for vegetables, and I never force it on them. I've just never felt a need to do that. I think, and they do fine. They're healthy as can be. They're smart, beautiful, healthy-looking kids. They don't have any issues, and so that is, what I do with my kids. And it's,
Sure.
if they want to do, and they do it. Sometimes they'll do a carnivore day. They're like, Dad, we just want to eat meat like you did. Okay, sure, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if they want to eat something else, I don't, like I said, I don't say you got to eat your veggies. I used to when they, 5 or 6, 6, 7 years ago. We go to a restaurant and they'd order a hamburger or something. No, I don't want a side of fries because that's junk food, but here's a broccoli. You got to eat all that broccoli before you can eat your burger. And they would sit there and, dutifully eat it down. This is that acquired taste that we all kind of painfully went through. I remember my father telling me, and I can remember distinctly sitting at a table eating some meatloaf, and he put all these vegetables that I hated in there. I didn't like onions for whatever reason, and they were crunchy, and I just didn't like the texture. And I was complaining about it. And my dad was like, well, you can't even taste it, just shut up and eat it. I said, Dad, if you can't taste it, why did you put it in there? And he didn't have an answer for that. You're right. But then years later, I asked him about it. He goes, yeah, I never really liked vegetables anyway. And I said, why did you make me go through all that, Dad? But anyway.
Again, we've been conditioned by the medical community that to make sure we eat the vegetables all the time. Dr. Bennett, any tips for the parents?
Do what your wife says.
Well,
I just want to, that's a very, I know it's humorous, but it's a very important part. Women are the nutritional decision makers of the household.
Yeah.
And I think that is the demographic that we really need to reach the moms, and we really need to get on that.
My wife is, we have 7 children, and my wife is definitely, she keeps her, she knows what to do properly. There's sometimes it's just like you said, it just gets overbearing and say, whatever you want. But overall, you look at our house and what she cooks. I mean, meat dominates about 80% of our meals, and that's just been naturally. I loved veg salad as a kid. I grew up that way myself. I enjoy that. I love spinach. But the more I was studying this stuff during that time of window, what I try to eat, Jim, is I've been eating like probably 40% fat, probably 50% protein, and the rest carbohydrates from fruit and vegetables only, because I've been off grains for about 12 years. It's so I think the more you educate ourselves on what food source really would be, and I still think the time of around the dinner table or whatever the family time is crucial. And when you have the steaks going, that kind of stuff you eat, I just think the part of the time, Jim, is hanging out. As you know, you have 4 kids too, grew up the same way I did, was that family time is crucial. So you want to have the kids enjoy what they eat. And always seem to be, my girls, boy, they're carnivores. They enjoy their steak.
Yeah, and the other thing is let them cook. Let them be part of the cooking process.
That's exactly right.
As soon as they can figure out how not to burn themselves, you let them in the thing and let them create, let them cook, teach them the skills, because this is something that, I mean, I don't even know if they offer home ec in most schools anymore. I mean, I think we had it in my school, my high school or grade school, and I just don't think people even know how to cook anything anymore. And that's this convenience food is convenient for making you sick and diabetic, but it's not much convenient for much else.
That's right. That's why, guys, I mean, everything we're talking about the last hour, I'm going back to one thing. All these things became vogue or from the federal government experts. They're not experts. All they have is the power of the government behind them, the power to tax, the power to influence where monies go. You talk about the government, probably some lobbyists. We have South Dakota senator, which is with the largest grain company, state in the union. You see, these things have to be looked at detail. And I'm not saying their motives aren't healthy. I'm not saying my government's healthy motive was not trying to be healthy. But you know what? They're not experts. You are the expert. And if you're lazy, I have a friend of mine that says discipline equals freedom. And that's you, Jim. And that truly is. So discipline in your life is crucially important. I believe we're trained not to have responsibility. When I hear you talking about popping food in, it's too lazy to wash a bowl. I'm thinking of the movie WALL-E, where in the future they're laying on these lounge chairs, just being floating everywhere. And that's what we're becoming at a rate to make life easier. It's becoming a lot less we're watching this transpire these generations.
Yeah, and I've referenced that movie many, many times as kind of just a dystopian look at the future. And, we see that. And I think part of the thing, and this is one thing I was pretty proud of. I never issued mobility scooters to patients. I always said, look, you need to stay mobile as long as you can. I don't care if you have to use a walker everywhere, and we've got this. I think the healthcare system enables these Wally-like people. I mean, you think about it, these people couldn't even exist before. And it's not to saying they shouldn't exist, but they shouldn't get to that point. And the only reason they get to that point is because we continue to kick the can down the road and, here's a pill, go see this guy, well, whatever. And we're too lazy to actually deal with the actual problem and do the service that we should be doing as physicians. The Wally, the situation, with that is, we have this, the population is getting so sick and no one's happy. Everybody's miserable. And so some people are welcoming these comforts, these, oh, it's too much effort for me to walk up the street. Can I get somebody to automatically walk my dogs or something like that? And we've got this virtual reality stuff coming and, this potential transhumanism and having implants chipped into us. I mean, this is, there are people looking at this right now, and this is probably for some people will be a reality. Some people will embrace that because their day-to-day existence is so basically pathetic and they're miserable, and they would welcome the fact that they can just strap on VR or to put a chip in their brain and experience a VR world that doesn't reflect what's actually going on with them. They check out. And we've seen there was a case a few years ago, this Korean couple playing some video game. It was like Second Life or something like that. And they had a baby, a real human baby that actually died from neglect because they couldn't stop looking at the screen while the baby's over there starving to death or dying or suffocating. This is what we're going towards. And I think, some of us, maybe we're old fashioned that we don't want that, but I think this is a glimpse into the future, perhaps, hopefully not.
Yeah. So we're going to conclude real quick. Best way to cook a steak: grilled, fried. What do you think?
Well, I mean, what I think is irrelevant. I think you need to cook it how you enjoy it. I'll tell you how I like to do it. I like a typically either a reverse sear somehow, either sous vide with a nice hot crust, a little salt on there. I'm good to go. I mean, that's, particularly if it's a nice fatty cut of meat, and that to me is hard to beat.
You talk about ribeye. I assume that's your favorite steak?
Yeah, I'd say generally. I mean, there's some other ones that are really contenders up there. I like a skirt steak. I like, fillets. I like, but I tend to, again, without carbs in my diet, I tend to prefer both from a nutrition and energy standpoint, but also from a flavor standpoint, meats that have a little more fat in them.
Yeah, I'm a little partial to filet. Ribeye is my second, and strips probably third. How about you, Dr. Brennan?
Ribeye, 100%. I was a grill guy. I loved it. My wife started a couple years ago, cast iron, and that crust on the cast iron and that moisture, nice rare steak. That's mine.
So we have a lot of people, obviously, in the world today that go to fast food joints all the time. If you're traveling, you have to go get something on the go. What are your places to recommend?
Well, I mean, again, if you have to, and I think, you can certainly get a burger patty somewhere. I mean, you can get, and I've been known to eat many of them. I've gone to a place like Wendy's and ask if they sell burger patties, and they say yes, and I'll take 10 of them. So, I mean, that's about 2.5 pounds of meat, which is a pretty routine size meal for me. But yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, like I said, I know there's people that will demonize this sort of stuff, and I think that for the most part, fast food restaurants have been a blight on society. But they do have beef available, and it's usually affordable, and it's cooked, and it's convenient, and so you can certainly do that. Like I said, we're holed up in a hotel. I'm not there right now, but we're spending the night, and so I brought an air fryer and a cinder grill, which is a little sous vide device, in the hotel room, so I can do that, while I'm on the go, and so it's kind of one of those things where you can generally, unless you're traveling to some place in the world that doesn't have meat, you're pretty much any place in the U.S. you can find a hamburger.
Yeah. Is there a myth that the longer you cook a steak, the less nutritious it is, or is that just a myth?
I don't think it's a myth. I think, the relative amount. I mean, I think just from ruining the steak,
Of course.
You think about people that like it well done or not your friends or something. No, that's a joke, but I don't think you've rendered it useless and devoid of nutrition by cooking it, beyond say medium rare, but there's probably some degree of diminution of some of the nutrition in there. And there's there was actually a study looking at pigs recently, looking at absorption of different nutrients, including amino acids, with different cuts of meat and different degrees of doneness. And they surprisingly found a variety of absorption patterns. And it wasn't clear that the least cooked was always the best. It was kind of variable depending on the cut of meat and the temperature it was cooked at.
Got it. So we always end where we ask each of you for 5 takeaways that you can partake to the audience. Dr. Brandon, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, I want to just go with one, and not to become philosophical, but I believe that's important today. A guy named Frederick Bastiat wrote an essay in 1850 called The Law. And he goes through all this thing about how government, the state, takes over the individual's life. And in his last paragraph, he says, we got to go back to where we never left. We got to go back to liberty. And I believe that's what we have to do, Jim. I believe liberty and freedom is the issue if you choose to eat vegan or you choose to eat a nice ribeye. I just want to get these ulterior motives out of people's ideas, to motivate people to do their own research and to be their own, driver behind what they are. But to me, it's liberty, Jim. And I want decentralization in as much as possible. And I think that idea of freedom and liberty is what I want to talk about. So, I'll do one, and then go try a nice ribeye. If you don't like steak, try a nice ribeye, and you'll change your mind.
Sounds good, Dr. Baker.
Well, I mean, and I can't disagree with that. I think our liberty is under attack right now in many ways, and I think that is something we need to be vocal and stand up to, and not compromise on. I mean, like I said, I fully support your right to eat a vegan diet or to take as many vaccines as you want or have whatever medical procedures you want to have done. That's up to you. But to mandate or deny based on whatever administration's in power is very frightening and potentially scary. But I think don't be afraid to question things. Don't be afraid to be vocal and stand up and say the things that you think. Your voice is important. I think you are your best advocate, and you are, like I said, when it comes to nutrition and health, there are so many studies out there that will support any bias you want. I mean, like I've said this before, if you want to, if you want confirmation of whatever bias you have, you can look in the research to find that. If you want results, look in the mirror, because this is ultimately going to show you what actually works for you personally. And what works for me may not work for you, may not work for Sally Sue or whatever, but find out what works for you. Don't be afraid to do that. Doctors are your employees. You don't work for your doctor. Find a doctor that's your advocate. Find a doctor that will support you in whatever you want to do. Even if he disagrees with what you want to do, he should be supportive of you. And I think doctors that abandon patients because they disagree with this or that, that's problematic. We maintain, when it comes to meat-based diets and that sort of low-carb diets, I have a list of hundreds and hundreds of doctors that are supportive at our website at MeatRx. But and then I think the other thing is that I think you got to put your health a priority. I mean, if nothing else really matters, they talk about health being wealth, but it's true. I mean, you can work your whole life, bust your butt, and I saw this all the time. I'd have patients that were just retired, and literally their entire retirement was spent going from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor. I mean, waiting for appointments, waiting for procedures. It was just, and their greatest joy in life, or the biggest thing they talked about was fighting with insurance companies or pharmacy prices or whatever. That is no way to spend your retirement. You don't work for that. So figure out how to free yourself from that fate, because that unfortunately is the fate of many, if not most people.
Excellent. Well, we absolutely appreciate your time tonight. Check out Dr. Baker on Instagram, Twitter, and his website, MeatRx. We wish you the greatest success in the world. And again, thank you for your time tonight.
Well, it's been a pleasure meeting both you guys and talking to you, Dr. Brandon. Again, thanks for doing this, and appreciate, more physicians in this fight, and I think we need to stand up together and let folks know that there's a large and growing minority, which hopefully maybe one day will become a majority of people that do this. So awesome.
So thank you, Dr. Baker, for your time, and thank you for your story. Those who don't read those who get your book, please focus on his bio. That chapter 1's phenomenal. Yeah, the carnivore diet, and good luck with your move.
Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. I got to get back to it, by the way. So,
all right.
Have a great day. Thanks for
Take care. Bye-bye.